Welcome to Beyond the Evidence Room, episode 2 of the Moon Theory. In the last episode, we discussed the theory of Stanley Kubrick creating the moon landing footage. We also explored the science behind how they broadcasted the footage, and then we dove deep with Mythbusters and their debunking episode. We navigated Bill Kaysing's book, and we also explored the Saturn V rocket. But today, we need to go deeper down the rabbit hole. Hold on to your horses, because this is gonna get weird. Let's go back to Bill Kaysing's book for a moment. I remember reading a short blip in one of his books about a man named Thomas R. Barron. This man that he spoke about in the book made me question reality. So of course, I had to look him up. Thomas R. Barron was a quality control inspector for the North American Aviation when the NAA was the primary contractor to build the Apollo Command Module for NASA Apollo 1. Thomas Barron presented a 300-page report to Congress on April of 1967, documenting poor workmanship, spacecraft 012 contamination, discrepancies with installations, problems in the environmental control systems, and many infractions of cleanliness and safety rules. He took the 169-page report critical of safety standards at the North American Aviation, and he leaked this report to the media. The North American Aviation, or the NAA, considered his action, specifically the leaked information, irresponsible, and they discharged him on January 5th of 1967. The NAA denied most of the claims except for partial validity to Barron's accusations. When the tragedy occurred, the Apollo 1, fire, Barron was apparently in the process of expanding his report to 500 pages. Barron's credibility was tampered with by his supposed informants, a fellow NAA employee named Mervyn Holmberg. Holmberg denied knowing anything about the cause of the accident, although Barron had told the committee that Holmberg knew exactly what caused the fire. Holmberg testified that Barron, quote unquote, gets all of his information from anonymous phone calls, people calling him and people dropping him a word here and there, quote unquote. Yet, some company officials later testified before Congress that about half of the charges were well-grounded. The chairman of NASA Oversight Committee stated that Barron had made a very valuable contribution to Apollo fire investigations, but that he had been, quote-unquote, overzealous. The Apollo 1 fire killed 3 astronauts, Gus Grissom, Ed White, and Roger Chaffee. Let's go over a little bit about Apollo 1, formerly known as AS-204, or just 204. The mission was a test run for spacecraft systems, life support, and electrical systems. Clearly, they failed this test completely and almost destroyed the entire NASA program. Congress opened an investigation. The claims and concerns by Thomas Barron was brought forth to Congress. There was no formal vote to outright cancel or shut down NASA Apollo's program following Apollo 1 fire. However, there were people in Congress that were trying to cut the budget. Instead, the decision to keep the program opened and was carried out by key congressional leaders, those of which I will display on the screen for you now.
Has there been any pressure on you by NASA?
Nothing. We were, my wife and I were somewhat harassed at home when the first thing broke some time back, but it's going away now.
Ironically, Barron and all of his family members died in a car/train crash only a week after his exposure to congressional questioning. How did the Apollo 1 accident happen? We discussed in the last video how astronauts would be in suits filled with oxygen. Yet back then, the oxygen level of 100%, which was highly flammable, was inside the vehicle. The use of full oxygen had been disputed, yet NASA continued to use it anyways because it decreased the pressure load on the vehicle in space. There had been many unmanned hardware tests prior to the fire. However, these astronauts suffered the consequences of NASA's mistake. Instead of closing down the program altogether, the flights of Apollo were suspended for 20 months. They also renamed the mission from AS-204 to Apollo 1, and Apollo 2 and 3, they never existed. The total number of astronauts' deaths is still unknown. However, 17 deaths were confirmed, and there were other accidents that also occurred. There were 3 major disasters: Apollo 1 in 1967, Challenger in 1986, and Columbia in 2003. Plus, several other astronauts and workers have died or been seriously injured during training. For example, the T-38 jet accident that crashed before reaching space. This is just one of the many accidents that have occurred. If you would like to know more about Apollo 1 mission or any other accidents, please visit NASA. Visit their website. Johannes Hevelius used early telescope mapping to visibly see parts of the moon in the 17th century, and he mapped the moon by hand. Between 1966 and 1997, NASA had a lunar orbiter program and put 5 uncrewed U.S. spacecraft into space to photograph 99% of the lunar surface to find a safe landing zone for Apollo 11. Now, let's explore the moon a little. If you line up 30 Earths in a row, you would get to the moon. Apollo 11 took about 4 days to land on the moon. They entered the orbit about 76 hours and then landed at 103 hours. The moon is roughly 239,000 miles away. If you sent an uncrewed probe, it would take about 35 hours, maybe longer, but that's pretty darn fast. But if you did the moonwalk, it would probably take you about 9 years. Now, we look up at Luna, our moon. We wonder, how did it get there so perfectly positioned? Well, the theory goes that this giant Mars-like planet called Theia slammed into Earth, and the debris from the collision created our moon. Evolution theory. The moon's mass affects the ocean tides, pulling on the planet, and it creates the tides in the ocean. The moon is about the quarter size of Earth, and the sun is about 400 times wider than the moon. Yet it appears almost the same size as the sun. The same side of the moon is always visible to Earth due to tidal locking. Some fascinating detail about the moon is that during Apollo 12, they crashed the lunar Lancer, which made the moon ring like a bell for about an hour. And then they did it again to Apollo 13. They dropped a Saturn V booster, and apparently the moon rang for like 3 hours. Now, one of the biggest conspiracies I wanted to mention, last but not least, actually this is last, is the Van Allen radiation belt. And we had discussed this a little bit earlier, how they believed that they couldn't get through the Van Allen radiation belt because the temperatures were so extreme. However, it's low density in space because there is no atmosphere. So even though the temperatures do reach 2,000 to 20,000 Kelvin, this does not affect spacecraft because there are very few particles, and these particles are very small, that it does not affect spacecraft. And the total heat transferred to the ships are virtually 0. And I will put a display so you guys could see for yourself. The Van Allen belt really is meant to protect the planet more so than anything else from solar radiation from the sun. So there you have it. It's important to have a curious mind because, like they said, curiosity kills the cat. And I have 9 lives, and I'm going to use all 9 of them if I can. How deep does this rabbit hole really go if you investigate it? What do you think the moon is? Do you think it's hollow? Do you think we really went to the moon? So leave a like, subscribe, and stay tuned for the next one. Thank you for joining Beyond the Evidence Room.